May the words that I speak and the thoughts and wanderings of all of our hearts draw us closer to God, who is our rock and our Redeemer. This is the last Sunday before Reformation Day, so if I want to talk at all about Reformation, today might as well be the day to do it. We are, in the United Church of Canada, what we call ourselves is a Reformed and Reforming church. We are, like many other churches, a product of the Reformation that happened, a little over 500 years ago in Europe, when Martin Luther wrote down his 99 theses and nailed them to the door at the church in Wittenberg. And there's a wonderful song, a little polka about it, that I'll make sure gets up on Facebook so you can all see it. Reformation Day is, of course, also Halloween Day. And it's a reminder of where we've come from. But it's also a reminder of where we are. Because we are actually in the midst of another Reformation. And it's much easier to see it from the other side than while we're in the middle of it. But Christianity is in the middle of some big changes, some big upheavals, probably bigger than the ones that we faced in 500 years ago in the Protestant Reformation. Although so far, thankfully, it seems in a less bloody fashion. We see our faith being used to represent different sides of issues in sometimes vastly different ways. And it can be very hard to see how anyone can say that the only Christian, if you're a Christian, you must. I find it really hard to get my head around how you can possibly say if you're a Christian, you must be an American Republican. Partly because I'm not an American. And partly because I can see very clearly how you can be a Christian and not be a part of that political party or political system. That the way of Jesus is not tied directly to any political party, but most certainly not that one. In my opinion, I want to be careful. It's not our election. I have to be more careful about not being partisan in our elections, but I think that you can be a faithful person and believe in higher taxation for higher government services, and you can be a Christian and believe in lower taxes and lower government services, and that's where most of the divisions actually lie between the parties, but anyway, we are at a time of great change, and the pandemic has only accelerated some of that change and pushed some of it into the fore. But we're in the middle of it, and it's hard to see what's going on. We have just got to keep on holding on to our faith and loving our neighbor. It's all we can do while we're in the midst of the chaos. And I think a really good example for us today can be taken out of the story of the death of Moses. You see, Moses had been, like the text tells us, the greatest leader that had ever arisen in Israel. It says in the text there, before or since. So Moses is, as this leader is saying, is greater than King Josiah, is greater than King David, is greater than Abraham. Moses is the central figure of the Jewish faith. Moses is to Judaism in many ways what Muhammad is to Islam, and the Buddha is to Buddhism, and Jesus is to Christianity. Moses is the central figure. And he journeys with his people through a whole lot. They spend 40 years in the desert. And you know what the idea of 40 years is? The idea of 40 years is it's a whole generation. Remember that lifespans were generally a bit shorter, despite this Moses living to be 120 thing. Lifespans were generally a lot shorter back then. Although the maximum human lifespan is always what it has been and probably will continue to be, that 120, that's pushing the limits. People do live to be 120, but it's really, really, really rare. There might be a touch of exaggeration in the story, the point being that Moses had lived a really long and full life. But 40 years is a generation. All the people who were in leadership 40 years prior, in biblical times with biblical lifespans, were no longer in leadership. And it was a whole new group of people. All the people who were moving out of the desert across the Jordan to start the new life in the promised land, the vast majority of them had no memory at all of Egypt. And that was important, because they were going someplace new to do something new, and they were not going to be called back to, well, this is how we did it in Egypt. They had to be able to rely on God because they were doing something new. It was all about, who are we now? Not about who were we 40 years ago? Who were we when we left Egypt? But who are we now? And to make that new transition and come into that new time, in fact, they did need a new leader. And Joshua was that leader for them, to bring them across. And just like Moses took them across the Red Sea, so would Joshua take them across the Jordan River and take them into the new land. But that is also, in a sense, what we are experiencing. That we are in the midst of this in-between time. And like I've said before, it's on a huge scale. There's a small scale that we're in this pandemic time. And it's a time when nothing is the way it was before. It's like being in the wilderness. We have to figure everything out from the beginning, and everything's different. We can't even buy tuna the way we used to. We can't start at the top of the tuna aisle. We have to go to the bottom of the tuna aisle, work our way all the way up to the top of the tuna aisle. It's all different, and it's hard. The differences and the changes, big and small, that we're having to go through are really hard. Like the Israelites spending 40 years in the desert, it's shaking everything up. We come to church and we can't even sing. We can't talk to people. It's not the same. Nothing's the same. Curling's not the same. Golf is not the same. Restaurants are not the same. Our whole society is shaken up. And what we need now is the courage to be able to go forward into something new. The courage to take the best of the new things we've experienced, combine that with the wisdom of the best of what was before, and go forward into something that's new and different and better. I think that's why all of this social unrest has kind of come out of the pandemic, because everything got shaken up and everyone went home for 2 months or however long it happened to be in different places. But people went home and had time by themselves to think and interact in different ways. And people started to realize that we can do different and we can do better. And that's what we're doing. We're building back better. We're figuring out the best that we can be together. And as we're reconstructing everything, the world has been thrown upside down, our lives have been thrown upside down, and we're trying to figure out how to put them back together. What are the rules? How do we do this? We start with love God and love your neighbor. That's all. Just love God and love your neighbor, and let the pieces fall where they will. Thanks be to God. Amen.